Hello, everyone. Welcome to the No Line Podcast. And we're sitting here at the Gambling and Risk-Taking Conference in Las Vegas. And our guest today is Dr. Anastasia Hronis. Dr. Hronis, welcome.
Thank you so much for having me. Pleasure to be here.
And for today, you are Anastasia.
Yes.
Great. You are a psychologist.
Yes, I am.
In Sydney, Australia.
I am.
And your work is broad.
Mm-hmm.
Can you tell us more about your work?
Yes, so I work across clinical practice. So I work as a clinical psychologist, seeing patients and clients for individual therapy, group therapy, and I also work as a lecturer and researcher at the University of Technology in Sydney.
And what has your research encompassed prior to some of your research in responsible gambling?
Yes, so I've done research in mental health more broadly, looking at mood disorders, anxiety, depression, working with a various range of clients and doing research into sort of mental health, including people who are experiencing addictions and specifically difficulties with gambling. And from that, I guess I sort of took an interest in more the responsible gambling space. And I'm quite interested and passionate about early intervention, how we can try and help prevent people from developing difficulties, whether they be mental health difficulties or addictions, problems with gambling, etc. And so therefore took more of an interest in the responsible gambling space from, I guess, a public health perspective.
And when treating, say, depression or anxiety, there's a protocol that's effective.
Yes.
And when treating gambling addiction, is there a protocol?
There are treatments that have been found to be effective, but the literature is still not at the same place as it is perhaps with other addictions. We have a lot more information and knowledge around, say, alcohol use and addictions to drugs than we do with gambling. There certainly have been research studies evaluating some of the standard treatments like cognitive behaviour therapy and other therapies for gambling, and we do know that some of them do work, but there's still a lot more research that needs to be done to find out how we can make them more effective.
Do you feel that with responsible gaming, or even in the treatment of problem gambling, do you feel like it should be accelerating more to a place where you treat, say, anxiety and depression with a specific protocol? Should it be more advanced by now? In more progress?
Yeah.
And if so, what do you think is causing resistance?
It's a good question. Certainly in terms of working with people who present to the clinics and have difficulties with gambling, there's definitely the crossover with anxiety, depression, trauma, other sort of mental health conditions, and part of the work that I think still needs to be done is better figuring out what do we address first? Do we address the sort of mental health concern? Do we address the gambling first? How do the two interact? And how does that therefore inform the treatment that we need to do? And then in the broader scope of things, how do we identify people when they're perhaps moving up that spectrum of risk before they sort of come into the clinic with a diagnosable problem with gambling, when they may be experiencing some harms early on but they haven't quite reached that point yet? How do we identify them and then provide some sort of intervention that's maybe not as intensive but still very useful for where they're at?
Have you seen some sort of pattern in the people that you're treating for problem gambling, that there are indicators of other problems that lead up to that?
Definitely, yes. There's almost always some sort of trajectory for a person. I mean, there are certain situations where people might suddenly experience some very difficult life events, and then they sort of suddenly might amplify their gambling and how much they're gambling and for how long. But very often for people, there is a trajectory they follow, and there are some signs. We also know that there are groups of individuals that are more vulnerable. For example, in Australia and in Sydney, where I'm from, there has been research done showing that our culturally and linguistically diverse communities are more vulnerable. We know young males are more vulnerable with online gambling, our Indigenous populations, etc. So even before someone starts to show markers, we can already sort of identify people who might be more at risk.
You know, when I look up at this conference, many times people have they're having a conversation with you, whether it's over food or coffee break, and it's your first time in Las Vegas.
Yes, it is.
And I think when we travel around the world, we will be in a new city or a new country and look at something that doesn't look quite right because, of course, we do it better back home. Okay, you've probably had some of those moments here in Las Vegas where you're looking at something maybe related to problem gambling and you think, wait, this shouldn't be like that. It could be solved by doing this. Have there been any of those moments? And if there have, what are one or two?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I knew coming to Las Vegas that there were going to be, you know, poker machines, electronic gaming machines everywhere. And we don't do very well with this in Sydney and in New South Wales. We have poker machines in pretty much every club, pub, you know, they're very easily accessible. But I was still shocked at the fact that I walked straight into the venue without anyone asking for ID, that there were children walking through the venues. I know there's rules around them not being allowed to loiter amongst the machines, but they can certainly walk through. And I had a moment where I was actually standing in the Starbucks line downstairs, and there was about 20 people in the line waiting for a coffee, and right across from us there were some electronic gaming machines, and one of them started going off. Someone must have been winning some money, and there were lights and there were sounds and there was everything happening, and you saw this sort of crowd of people gather round, and everyone in the Starbucks line also turn around to see what was happening and going on, and it just drew so much attention that I thought, for kids, walking through, hearing these lights and sounds, maybe not having the understanding or not being able to have the understanding of what gambling is, it must seem so attractive.
So fun.
Yeah, like a fun game.
Sure.
And I mean, what research tells us, not just specific to gambling, but a lot of things in general, is that early intervention and prevention is really important. In Australia, there's been a lot of research done around our sports betting culture, and we don't have poker machines that can be really accessed or seen by children. However, there's so much advertising around sporting that there's been research done that shows that children between the ages of, say, 12 to 16 can very easily identify the names of sports betting apps and companies and tell you about things like odds. So we know this makes these children more vulnerable to potentially developing problems or having an unhealthy relationship with gambling as they progress. And so when I was downstairs watching that machine go off, I couldn't help but think, what might be the long-term impacts of children seeing this?
Sure, the seed is already planted. That looks like so much fun. Mom or dad, I can't wait to be of age so I can play that. Any other takeaways so far from the Gambling and Risk-Taking Conference that have been aha moments?
Yes. I had one that almost shouldn't seem like an aha moment, but it really was for me. I heard a presentation that was done by researchers, one of them who actually had a background in marketing. And she was talking about the ways in which we can more effectively, from a public health perspective, deliver messages to the public around responsible gambling, harm minimisation, what that might look like, because there is such a stigma around it. People hear responsible gambling and they go, I don't need that because I don't have a problem with gambling. And it was really interesting to hear how she had collaborated with another researcher who worked in public health to look at how to most effectively deliver these campaigns and share these messages. And the aha moment for me was really around working with people from different backgrounds and with different areas of experience. Her background was in marketing, and looking at how we can bring everyone's knowledge together to have the most effect that we can.
Yeah, that's great, because in construction they do that. They'll bring if it's a project, they'll bring the team charrette, and sometimes the landscape architect will have the best idea about inside the house, even though their work is outside the house.
Yes.
what has been the buzz that you've been hearing at the conference? Is there any one or two things that you're hearing seems like repetitive about people talking?
Yes. The two main areas, I think, are looking at how to improve treatments that are being delivered to people who are experiencing difficulties with gambling, and the other being the other end of the spectrum and responsible gambling frameworks and what different people around the world are doing, what different countries are doing in terms of policy and implementation of frameworks, and how culture impacts those sorts of things, and how we can also learn from one another rather than trying to reinvent the wheel. So they're the two real key areas that sort of stand out and are so necessary for us to be here talking about.
More collaboration. And any final thoughts for those either watching this video or listening to the podcast before we say farewell?
Well, I would say if you are interested in this work or do research or work in this space, then come to the conference, because it's been excellent. Next time they have it, I think in a few years' time. It's been absolutely wonderful, and it's such a great space to have international colleagues come together and share their learnings and the most recent sort of work that they've been doing. But other than that, I'd say we all need to keep doing work in this space and investing time and effort and funds into helping those who have difficulties with gambling, but also looking at how we can prevent people getting there in the first place.
The best way to reach you?
Anyway, I'm on social media. I'm on LinkedIn. You can search up my email through the university website. But I'm always more than happy for people to reach out and connect.
Great. And Anastasia's contact info will be in the description to this video or podcast. Until 3 years from now.
Yes.
Be good to see you again. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Farewell, everyone.
Bye.
Thanks for listening to the No Line Podcast, hosted by Philip Beere. For a complete list of past episodes, visit iTunes or www.nolinepodcast.com. That's www.nolinepodcast.com. The No Line Podcast is committed to responsible gaming. The No Line Podcast is a Philip James Media production.